All right, guys. So this is going to be a five tips like series that I'm going to be making on the way to global launch. I'm not gonna call it top five because it's going to be kind of like a series going on, so it's easier to digest rather than just kind of like dumping a lot of information on everybody, especially to the newbies, which is basically what this video is going to be geared towards. Number one that I'm going to be discussing here is to decide between endurance and evasion early so you can plan out your gear. If you're new to the game, you probably don't know what endurance and evasion is, so I'll explain that real quick. Endurance is basically anti-crit, and evasion is basically dodge, right? A lot of builds use evasion a lot because there's certain weapons like crossbow or dagger that kind of, or sword and shield that kind of like synergize with evasion quite a bit. And there's certain builds as well that synergize a lot with endurance, like for example, like bow has a passive that gives you more endurance. And it's more of a safer bet because of how easier it is to access hit now compared to before. So the reason why I say to plan out your gear when it comes to endurance and evasion is because, for example, right, if I'm going to choose a piece of gear here, if you look into the side here where it says trait list, this is very crucial because traits are a huge part of gearing. You can see that this has magic evasion, magic endurance, and then melee evasion and melee endurance. So the one thing that you're not seeing here right now is, and which also exists, is range endurance and ranged evasion. So that's one of the reasons why I want you to plan out your gear in advance, because even though endurance and evasion are only a part of the mitigation in this game, they are a huge factor in mitigation, right? So what you want to plan out in advance is, number one, you need to make sure that the piece of gear that you're going for is farmable, and of course, number two, making sure that it has the necessary evasion or endurance that you're looking for. So this is something that you will decide once you kind of, ask the players that have been playing for a while, hey, what's the current meta? And let's say that they're saying like, yeah, the current like meta right now, for the most part, is going to be like melee, like a lot of melee. It's very repressive. So you really need to build like melee evasion or melee endurance, right? So that's kind of like your signal there where you want to build melee evasion or melee endurance, because I can't tell you which one is more valuable than the other, just because by the time that global launches, the meta could be completely different and you will need to build a certain amount of evasion or endurance. And yes, that might also change in the future, but at the very least you want to build for something that everybody's using versus something that not everybody's using, right? So that's why I want you to decide early on if you want to go endurance or if you want to go evasion. So that's all going to depend on your gear. If you have any questions, just ask it in the comment section or on any of my live streams. And the second one is to prioritize at least like one offensive skill. Goes double, especially for like supports and tanks in particular. So for example, for tanks, it's very tempting to think that like you're gonna be doing all the lower level dungeons on your way to level 50, and you could go like taunt first or something like that, or defensive cooldowns or something like that. Prioritize like your offensive skills first, and that goes for healers as well. Let's say like you're going for like one, for example. If you go healing, if you upgrade your healing all the way in the beginning and all your other support skills, you're gonna be in for a very, very bad time. So I don't recommend that you focus on healing. So at least like level one, let's say like your touch of despair, level one offensive skill, because if you don't, then that grind from like 1 to 50 is going to be completely and utterly agonizing. So I recommend at least have your offensive, at least one, at the very least one offensive skill. And number three is to max out your enhances before switching to the next higher tier gear. So what do I mean by that? So to put it simply, if you have a green piece of gear, right? Let's say like you have this right here, this green belt. The max upgrade for this one is +6. So you want to get it to +6 first, because then you can transfer it over to a blue piece of gear. You can, before you weren't able to, but now you can actually transfer it early. But there's just no point, right? Because like for the most part, you probably have more traits on your green gear anyway. So it's okay to get that to +6 first before you want to transfer it over to a blue piece of gear. It's the same thing. It's the same thing with like blue piece of gear to purple as well. If you want to transfer it over, make sure that you get it to +9 at least, which you will be, because for the most part you're going to be sticking to blue gear anyway, so there's no rush in going over to purple right away, because then you're just going to gimp yourself. And you might have seen like these traits here, but I will get to that on another video or another like topic, just so we don't get dumpstered. You just don't get dumped like a lot of information and retain none of it, which is not going to help you. We'll discuss that another time, but that's one of the reasons why you want to max out your enhances first, because really you're not in any type of rush here. You're going to take your sweet time, because you're gonna have to wait anyway before you transfer over to a higher tier of gear. And mind you, like after these tier 1 purples, for example, like this, there's tier 2 weapons as well, tier 2 pieces of equipment as well that you're gonna have to transfer to anyway. So take your time, build up your gear first. And then number 4, which kind of like branches out from number 3, is to do not over prioritize switching over to purple gear, because a fully traded out blue piece of gear will always be better in most cases. The only other cases that a purple piece of gear is worth transferring to is probably like your weapons, right? Because like for weapons, obviously you need to have a you need to get your purple to +9 as soon as you can, just because it gives you the most bang for your buck in terms of like stats and like damage, right? Same goes for like all your offhands too. You want to get your offhands as soon as possible, because if you're DPS, you need more damage. If you're tank, you also want more damage, but also because it gives you more damage so that you can maintain threat, because otherwise there will be cases where a crossbow user will. In terms of not over prioritizing, we are also going to touch upon traits a little bit. Traits are kind of like a whole topic by themselves. I want to make like a different video for these, because traits are, especially for new players, are one of the most underestimated stats, I would say, that people miss out on. But there's such a huge power spike that you have to pay attention to them. So basically, the reason why I want you guys to take your time, and I have a guide as well, I'll link it in the comment section, in the pin section, is because if you can see these things right here, right? These are called traits. So like when you're trying to enhance your gear, there's also traits on here. So let's say like you have these things right here, right? You can see on the side, if you click on the piece of gear and then trait list, you can see what other stuff you can have on there. So let's say for blue, you can have up to 3 traits, and you can have them up to tier 3, right? For green pieces of gear, you can have up to 2 lines of traits, right? Just this and then this, and you can't use this one for a green, and they can go up to like tier 2, right? So what makes them like really good is that, so for example, if you're a tank, right? And let's say you're a tank and you're going for obviously max health, because that's like the most helpful for you as a tank. If for purple gear, it's 150 each. Mind you, like for blue and green, it's always going to be 150. There's just like a higher tier. So for blue, let's say like you have 2 max health on a piece of accessory. So that means you get extra 300 health, right? If you have a blue piece, it can go up to 450 health. So that's, if you look at other pieces of gear here, for example, like this one is a purple at +8, right? Maxes out at +9. This one gives you 525 health, versus let's say like you're going for this thing right here, which let's say like this accessory gives you 555 health at +9, plus it will give you extra 450 health from maxing out those traits. So that's one of the reasons why you don't want to over prioritize when it comes to your going from like green to blue, or blue to purple, or purple T1 to purple T2, is because of those things, right? It's like you never want to transfer over and you have to sit on a piece of purple gear that you know you can't farm, that you know will take a lot of time for you to like max out the traits on, because they have a lower drop chance, they're going to be more expensive in the auction house. There's just a lot of things, right? So hold off on those for a little bit, and then trade up your easy to trade blues. There are certain purple that you will move on to first before the other ones, just because they're easier to farm, but we'll get to that in another video, okay? And then after that, is going to be the last one out of the 5, which is alts. This goes double if you're free to play, and even if you're spending, you kind of want to do it too, because if you don't, then whatever you're spending, the free to play players will either catch up or match the Solent, or I mean, rather the Lucent gain that you're getting by spending, or if not, surpass you even, right? The main thing why you want to have alts is because the premier or the premium currency in the game, Lucent, which is what you use to buy pieces of gear, is Lucent. Lucent is only attainable to start with through real money, and then if you sell stuff in the market, you can get Lucent as well. So you can buy stuff in the market. So how do you start off gaining Lucent if you're free to play? Again, it's going to be alts. So you can have up to 2 other alts, 3 including your main character, right? And you're going to be doing dungeons with those alts as well. Because the reason why you want to do dungeons with those alts is because of the fact that dungeons drop purple gear as well. So let's say like tier 1 dungeons right here. So let's say like this one, for example, this one, the Karnix sword and shield here, it drops for you. And let's say that your alt is not a sword and shield, or even if your alt is a sword and shield, you want to sell it because it's like big gains, right? And it's definitely going to be a lot more expensive in the beginning. So let's say like big ticket items here, like stats like heavy attack, max health, critical hit, or hit, people, including people who are spending especially, will want these stats. And if it's already on your alt anyway, what you can do is you can sell this in the market for, a premium, especially early on in the game, and then you'll have the Lucent income start to come in. And since you can do 3 dungeons a day on your alts, so meanwhile you're doing dungeons on your main, and you can start collecting your traits there. Meanwhile, your 2 other alts are also doing dungeons. That way you can start stacking Lucent, so that when the prices start to kind of like drop a little bit, that's when you can start to kind of like start buying your traits for a cheaper price compared to the beginning. And that kind of goes into the next part of this advice, which is, as much as possible, if you can get a static party, join an organized guild. Because if you're playing Throne in Liberty, if you want to achieve anything meaningful in this game, you really have to be in a guild. You really have to be with a group of people to help each other out, because the systems that are in this game really, really help out when it comes to grouping up, right? Basically, you need to be in a party, because not only are the instance dungeons going to be like important when it comes to farming with your alts, but the open world dungeons as well, right? It's a very, very big deal for you to be able to party up with people and start farming these, because these open world dungeons, they actually drop purple gear as well, and at a decent enough drop rate as well, right? And they drop all the other good stuff as well, these parchments, these ores that you will use to craft your skill books, your enhancement items, blue items that even if you don't care about them, they could have like a decent enough trait that you could sell or use for yourself. That's basically it, like when it comes to alts, right? Alts, and then having an organized or a static party. If you can join an organized guild now, or an organized community now, and kind of like reach out to people like, hey, at launch, do you guys want to, yada yada, you guys want to party up, you guys want to be part of a static party? Or if you're completely new, like, hey guys, I'm looking for a static party at launch, like full disclosure, I'm new to the game, I was wondering if you guys could offer me like any type of guidance. That way that way like I can be an asset to you guys as well, right? It's like, because like having a reliable teammate that you can rely on to do these dungeons makes these dungeons every single day, having to do them every single day, that much more convenient, right? So besides that, eventually, in terms of like Lucent gain, eventually you'll be able to do like the challenge dungeons, and then you'll get the runes, and you'll be able to sell them or use them for yourselves. But that's like a topic for another day. We'll discuss that as well in terms of like Lucent gains. But that's like the most basic, most easiest, earliest way that you can gain Lucent, especially if you're free to play, to the point where if you get like certain good pieces of gear with good traits, you will probably earn lucent faster than somebody who's like a dolphin or something. You may not be able to compete with a whale in terms of like lucent gain, but you'll be close enough, right? And especially with how this game works sometimes, where if you're not in like a huge organized like group of people in the GVGs, then all your whaling won't make a lot of impact because you're probably just gonna get run over anyway. But yeah, that's it pretty much for now. That's gonna be the first 5 tips that I'm going to be releasing in this series. There will be a lot more. If there are certain things that you guys want to hear about or you want to kind of like are curious about, I can include it in the next one. Just make sure that you leave that in the comments or stop by on the stream and just, let me know what you want to learn.